You're just a waitress. Don't forget your place." The words hung in the air like a cold, biting wind. Mark Peterson, the billionaire CEO, said it without hesitation, his voice dripping with arrogance. Naomi Collins stood motionless, her hands still holding the wine glasses she was delivering to the table. The clinking of silverware and soft chatter of the high-end restaurant seemed to fade into a distant hum. In the lavish ambience of the five-star restaurant, Naomi's black uniform and simple apron set her apart from the wealthy elites around her, but not in the way they thought. She was invisible to them, until now. Naomi had been through much worse. As a black woman in this world, she was used to the looks of dismissal, the glances of superiority. But something about tonight felt different. The words from Mark Peterson weren't just casual insults. They were a signal that he believed he could humiliate her and get away with it. The other guests at the table exchanged glances, some even smirking at the entertainment unfolding before them. Naomi felt the heat rise in her chest, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she took a deep breath, her calm composure almost unnerving in the face of such disrespect. Mark Peterson leaned back in his chair, his sharp suit gleaming under the dim chandelier light. He saw her, the woman who had been refilling his glass all night, but only as someone beneath him, someone who existed solely to serve. He didn't see Naomi as a person. He saw a tool, a disposable servant. But Naomi was done being invisible. She'd had enough of this life, enough of being ignored, enough of being reduced to nothing more than a shadow in someone else's world. Slowly, she set the glass down in front of him and leaned in slightly. "You don't know who I am, do you?" she asked, her voice steady, almost too calm. Mark looked up at her, eyebrow raised in mock amusement. "What are you going to do about it, sweetheart? You're a waitress. You can't even afford to speak to me." Naomi smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're right. I'm a waitress. But I know exactly who you are. And you'll regret this." She turned, leaving him in stunned silence as she walked away, her steps sure, her heart racing. She had just ignited something she couldn't take back. And Mark Peterson had no idea what was coming for him. The room was filled with the hum of quiet conversations, the clink of silverware, and the soft clatter of plates being cleared away. The dim lighting softened the sharp edges of the luxury restaurant, casting a glow over the polished mahogany tables. But amidst the luxury, something had shifted. Naomi Collins could feel it, like a change in the air pressure before a storm. She had walked away from the table where the billionaire CEO, Mark Peterson, had humiliated her. His words still echoed in her ears, but she kept her composure. She moved swiftly through the crowded dining room, her eyes fixed ahead. She'd heard it all before, the dismissive words, the condescending tone, the looks that said she was nothing more than a servant. But tonight was different. Tonight, something inside her had snapped. She'd had enough. Naomi had worked in high-end restaurants long enough to know how the world viewed people like her. As a black woman, she had been ignored, undervalued, and dismissed time and time again. People saw her as invisible, just another face in the crowd of waitstaff. But she had learned to play that role, to blend in and remain unnoticed, to gather information from the shadows. Naomi had worked hard to get to this point. She had put in the long hours, scraped by on tips, and watched others rise while she stayed in place. But she was no longer willing to stay silent, to accept the disrespect. Mark Peterson didn't know it, but Naomi had been quietly studying him all night. She had seen the way he spoke to his colleagues, his haughty smile, his casual dismissal of anyone who didn't fit into his world. She had watched as he reveled in his power, believing it would always be enough. But Naomi had learned the value of being underestimated. She had learned that those who were ignored the most often knew the most. She had learned to listen. The more she watched Mark, the more she realized something that others in the room had missed. He was a man of ego, yes, but also of weakness. Naomi knew that power wasn't just about money or status. True power came from understanding, from patience, and from knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. She knew it was time to turn the tables. Naomi made her way to the back of the restaurant, where the kitchen doors swung open and closed with the rush of service. The staff moved quickly, their eyes fixed on their tasks, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the front of the house. Naomi walked past them, her thoughts racing. She wasn't angry, not in the way most people would think. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about showing the world that people like her mattered. She had seen the way the other guests at Mark's table had laughed at his cruel words, as if his power gave him the right to belittle her. It made her sick. Naomi's fingers tightened around the pen in her pocket as she approached the office of the restaurant manager. She had a plan. Mark Peterson's pride would be his downfall. She was going to expose him, and she wasn't going to wait for anyone's approval. Her heart pounded as she stepped into the small, cramped office. The manager looked up from his desk, his expression blank. "Naomi, everything all right?" he asked, clearly distracted by the evening's events. "I need to talk to you," Naomi said, her voice steady but filled with determination. She leaned in, her eyes never leaving his. "Mark Peterson just called me stupid in front of the entire table. I want you to do something about it." The manager looked startled, but Naomi wasn't finished. "He's about to lose a deal worth $3.5 billion, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." The manager's eyebrows shot up in confusion. "What are you talking about?" Naomi didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. She had already planned her next move. As she turned to walk away, she caught a glimpse of Mark's smug face through the restaurant's front windows. He was oblivious to what was coming. Naomi had just ignited a chain of events that would change everything. Mark Peterson had no idea that the waitress he had humiliated was about to take him down. She wasn't just a server anymore. She was a force, and the world would soon find out. Naomi could feel the tension building in her chest as she walked back into the dining area. The moment had arrived. She had made her decision. There was no turning back now. Mark Peterson sat at the table, his back straight and his eyes scanning the room, clearly unaware of the storm that was about to hit him. His earlier mocking words were still fresh in her mind, but now, they only fueled the fire inside her. She had spent years being ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. Tonight, she would make sure no one forgot her name. The restaurant buzzed with the usual hum of conversation, but Naomi felt like she was in a different world. She moved with purpose, her steps measured and confident. The rich smells of truffle oil and roasted duck filled the air. The sound of silverware clinking against fine china echoed softly, but none of that mattered to her now. It was time to change the game. As she approached the table, she couldn't help but notice how Mark's eyes flicked over her, dismissing her before she even spoke. He hadn't learned a thing. "Excuse me, Mr. Peterson," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. The table fell silent. Mark looked up, a hint of annoyance crossing his face. "What is it, Naomi?" he asked, using her name as if it were an afterthought. "I have something to show you," Naomi replied. Without waiting for his permission, she slid the tablet from her pocket and handed it to him. Mark glanced down at it, his expression still one of indifference, until he saw what was on the screen. The room seemed to pause. The figures on the screen were impossible to ignore: documents, financial projections, and a series of emails that laid out the collapse of a multi-billion-dollar deal. Naomi had hacked into the deal's final negotiations, and she knew exactly where the cracks had formed. "I don't think you want to sign this contract," Naomi continued, her voice steady, unwavering. Mark's face changed in an instant. The smug look he had worn all evening faded, replaced by something Naomi had been waiting for: uncertainty. The table was completely silent now, every eye on Mark as he scrolled through the documents. His fingers froze for a moment before he looked up at Naomi, disbelief written all over his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. "It's the end of your deal," Naomi said simply. "Everything you've worked for is about to come crashing down. I can make it go away, but you need to listen. You need to understand the value of what you've taken for granted." Naomi's eyes never left his. Mark was a powerful man, used to being in control. But tonight, in this room full of influential guests, he was no longer the one holding the power. Naomi had taken it. The realization hit Mark like a tidal wave, and for the first time that evening, he seemed small. The arrogant CEO who had belittled her was now staring at the consequences of his own actions. Naomi took a deep breath, knowing the battle wasn't over yet, but she had already won the most important part. She had shown him what it meant to be underestimated, to be forgotten. And now, she had his attention. "You're not in control here, Mark," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything she had been through. "Not anymore." Naomi turned and walked away from the table, the sound of her footsteps echoing through the room. She knew the damage was done. The table was in chaos, and no one would look at Mark the same way again. For the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she had control over her own destiny. The world had been watching, and now they would remember her. She had made her mark, and no one would ever ignore her again. Naomi stood in the corner of the kitchen, watching the chaos unfold in the dining room. Her heart was racing, but she kept her composure. She had done it. She had struck the first blow in a battle no one had expected. The restaurant was buzzing with whispers, the guests exchanging glances as Mark Peterson, the man who had once mocked her, now sat frozen, staring at the tablet she had handed him. His face was pale, his hands shaking slightly as he tried to process what had just happened. Naomi knew this was just the beginning. She had shown him his vulnerability, but the real challenge lay ahead. Mark had power, but he lacked control over the situation now. Naomi had flipped the script. The thought made her smile, just a little. She hadn't anticipated feeling this sense of satisfaction, but it was there, bubbling inside her, pushing her forward. She couldn't afford to let her guard down now. The CEO's empire, built on pride and dominance, was crumbling. Naomi had given him a taste of what he had been blind to all along, his own weakness. But it wasn't just about the deal. It was about proving that she was more than just a waitress. She was someone who could take control of her own destiny, who could make the powerful see her for who she truly was. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and Naomi turned to see the restaurant manager, his face a mixture of confusion and awe. "Naomi," he said softly, his eyes wide. What did you just do?" She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I did what had to be done." The manager opened his mouth to speak again, but then closed it, as if weighing his next words. Naomi could see the hesitation in his eyes. He had witnessed Mark Peterson's reaction firsthand. It was rare to see someone so unmoved by power. "The deal," the manager began, glancing toward the dining room. "It's gone. He's lost everything, just like you said." Naomi nodded, her eyes scanning the room, catching sight of Mark, still sitting at the table, completely out of his element. He was a man used to control, used to winning. But now, he was a man who had just lost everything. Naomi turned her attention back to the manager, her face calm, but the fire inside her had not dimmed. "This is just the beginning," she said. "Mark Peterson's empire may be crumbling, but my story is just getting started. I'm not going to be invisible anymore." The manager didn't respond immediately, but the look in his eyes told her that he understood. He wasn't just seeing a waitress anymore. He was seeing someone who had just shaken the very foundation of power. Naomi walked back into the dining area, her steps steady and purposeful. As she passed Mark's table, she couldn't resist glancing at him one more time. He was still staring at the tablet, completely unaware of how his life was about to change. The people around him were starting to murmur, their eyes shifting between Mark and Naomi. She had made her mark, and it wasn't just in the financial ruin of a powerful CEO. It was in the way the room was now looking at her. Naomi felt a rush of confidence, knowing that she had done something that most people could only dream of. She had taken back her power, and no one could ever take it from her again. Naomi stood at the back of the restaurant, her mind racing. The events of the evening had unfolded faster than she had anticipated, and now, she was left with a sense of both exhilaration and responsibility. She had done it. She had turned the tables on a billionaire, exposed his weakness, and in doing so, reclaimed her power. But as she glanced back toward the dining area, she saw Mark Peterson still sitting at the table, his eyes fixed on the tablet she had handed him. The reality of what she had just set in motion was beginning to hit him, and Naomi could almost see the panic creeping into his eyes. He had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, who dictated the terms. But now, his empire was slipping away, and it was all because of her. She didn't feel sorry for him. In fact, she felt something much stronger, satisfaction. She had spent years being underestimated, treated like she was invisible, like she didn't matter. But tonight, in this moment, she had forced the world to see her. Naomi knew that Mark wasn't going to let this go easily. He would fight to regain his control, to salvage what was left of his pride and his fortune. But Naomi wasn't going to back down. This was her moment, and she would make sure it counted. She could feel the weight of the eyes on her, the guests in the restaurant whispering, trying to piece together what had just happened. Mark Peterson had lost a deal worth billions of dollars, and they all knew it was because of the woman they had dismissed just a few hours earlier. Naomi turned to walk back into the kitchen, her footsteps steady, her heart still pounding in her chest. She could hear the faint murmur of voices behind her, but she kept her focus ahead. She wasn't done yet. In fact, she knew this was only the beginning. She had given Mark Peterson a taste of his own medicine, but she still had a lot to prove. She was no longer just a waitress in the background. She was a force to be reckoned with. As she reached the kitchen door, she paused for a moment. The chaos of the evening had settled into an uneasy quiet, and Naomi took a deep breath. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment where she would no longer be invisible. She had been patient, playing her role for so long, but now it was time to step into the light. Naomi walked into the back office, where the manager was sitting at his desk, still processing the events of the night. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Naomi, he started, but Naomi interrupted him. "It's done," she said, her voice calm but full of authority. "Mark Peterson's deal is gone. His empire is crumbling, and there's nothing he can do about it." The manager blinked, clearly in shock. "How did you?" Naomi smiled. "I did what needed to be done. I'm not just a waitress. I'm someone who can take control. And that's exactly what I did." The manager didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You've got some guts, Naomi. I've never seen anything like this." Naomi nodded. "You haven't seen anything yet. This is just the beginning. Mark Peterson may have power, but it's not enough. He thought he could dismiss me, treat me like I was nothing. But I'm not nothing. I never was." She turned to leave the office, but before she did, she paused at the door. "Make sure you take good care of the guests," she said with a smirk. "We don't want them to think this place is run by amateurs." With that, Naomi stepped out into the dining room once more, her confidence radiating with every step. The guests were still murmuring, their eyes following her as she walked past. She could feel their gaze on her, but it didn't faze her. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was a woman who had taken control, who had made the powerful see her. And she was only getting started. The following days were a whirlwind of attention and repercussions. Naomi could feel the eyes of the city on her, but she didn't let it faze her. The story of what happened at the restaurant had spread like wildfire. News outlets were running with the story, headlines screaming about the billionaire CEO who had lost everything in a matter of minutes, all thanks to a waitress. Naomi had never been the type to seek the spotlight, but now, she found herself in the middle of it. She walked through the streets of San Francisco with her head held high, her stride confident, knowing that her life had changed in a way she could never have imagined. It wasn't about the fame or the attention. It was about the fact that she had taken control. She had gone from being invisible to being someone who could no longer be ignored. Her phone was constantly ringing, calls from reporters, offers from business moguls, and even job offers from companies who had seen the viral story. But Naomi wasn't interested in any of it. She had bigger plans. She wasn't going to be bought or sold. She wasn't going to let anyone define her by her past, by the job she had once held, or by the way they saw her. She had seen the way people treated her, dismissive, condescending, as if she was nothing more than a prop in their world. But now, she was in control of her own narrative. She had learned that power didn't come from wealth or status. It came from knowledge, from understanding who you were and what you were capable of. Naomi spent the next few days putting her plan into motion. She wasn't going to let this moment pass her by. The world had seen her, but now it was time for her to see the world on her terms. She wasn't going to work for someone else. She was going to create something of her own, something that represented who she was and what she stood for. The whispers of the city faded into the background as Naomi focused on her goal. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to step into the future she had always dreamed of, where she was the one calling the shots. And as she stood in the bustling city, surrounded by the towering buildings that had once seemed so intimidating, Naomi smiled. She had made it. She had proven her worth, and now, nothing was going to hold her back. Naomi stood on the balcony of her new apartment, overlooking the city. The lights of San Francisco shimmered beneath her, a constant reminder of how far she had come. Just a few weeks ago, she had been invisible, a woman trapped in the shadows of others, dismissed and overlooked. But now everything was different. She had built her own world, one where she was the one in charge, the one making the decisions. She had always known there was more to her than just being a waitress, more than just being the person who served others. She had a vision, a drive, and now she was turning it into reality. Naomi had poured everything she had into her new venture, an inclusive space where people could come together, share ideas, and build something greater than themselves. The doors of her new cafe were set to open soon, and the anticipation in her chest was palpable. It wasn't just a business, it was her statement. A statement to the world that she was more than just a quiet observer. She was a force. The calls had stopped coming, the media frenzy had died down, but Naomi didn't mind. She didn't need the spotlight anymore. She had earned her place, not by playing the game others wanted her to play, but by creating her own. The world had seen her take down a billionaire, seen her expose the flaws of a system that thrived on disrespect and privilege. But now, she was focused on something bigger, building something real, something lasting. As she looked out at the city, Naomi couldn't help but feel proud. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but each challenge had made her stronger, more determined. She had fought for her place in this world, and now, she had it. The cafe was just the beginning. Naomi knew there would be more to come, more ways for her to make her mark on the world. She had learned that true power came from within, not from the approval of others, but from the strength to believe in herself, even when no one else did. She had fought against the tide, and now, she was riding it. Naomi smiled, the weight of everything she had achieved settling into her bones. She was no longer the woman who had been invisible, the woman who had been dismissed. She was the woman who had built her own empire, and nothing would ever take that away from her. Naomi woke up to the soft morning light filtering through the curtains of her new apartment. She had a quiet moment to herself before the day began, and she took it all in. The past few months had been a whirlwind, a series of steps that had changed her life in ways she had never expected. She had gone from being invisible, dismissed by those around her, to being someone who had built her own future, one decision at a time. The cafe she had dreamed of for so long was now a reality, and the grand opening was just days away. Naomi stood up, stretching her arms toward the ceiling, her body still adjusting to the quiet rhythm of success. There was no more rushing to serve others, no more hiding behind the expectations of people who didn't see her. She was her own boss now, and the freedom that came with it felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had spent so many years working tirelessly for other people's dreams. But now, she was creating her own. As Naomi moved through her apartment, getting ready for the day ahead, she thought about how far she had come. The journey had been anything but easy, but it had shaped her into someone stronger, more resilient. She had learned that success wasn't about following someone else's path. It was about carving out your own. And that was exactly what she had done. Her phone buzzed with a text, and Naomi smiled when she saw the message. It was from a potential investor who had seen the viral story about her and Mark Peterson. He wanted to meet with her to discuss future opportunities. Naomi had received countless messages like this over the past few weeks, but this one felt different. This was the kind of attention she wanted, the kind that recognized her for her ideas, her vision, and her strength, not just because of the scandal that had thrust her into the spotlight. As Naomi read the message, she couldn't help but think about how much had changed. Just months ago, she was struggling to make ends meet, unsure of her next move. Now, she was in a position to shape the future on her own terms. It was a heady feeling, but Naomi was ready for it. She knew that this was just the beginning. The cafe was a success, yes, but she had bigger plans, plans to expand, to create a space that wasn't just about food and coffee, but about creating a community, a place where people could come together, share ideas, and build something meaningful. Naomi's heart swelled with pride as she thought about the people who had supported her along the way. She had learned to trust herself, to believe in her own abilities, even when the world had told her she wasn't enough. Now, she had the chance to show the world exactly what she was capable of. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call from her old manager at the restaurant. Naomi had left that world behind, but she still kept in touch with some of the people who had helped her along the way. She picked up the phone, her voice calm, but full of determination. "Naomi," her manager said, sounding hesitant. "I just wanted to check in. You've done amazing things. But I wanted to ask, what's next for you?" Naomi smiled. "What's next?" she repeated, letting the question sink in. "I'm just getting started." As she ended the call, Naomi felt a surge of excitement. She had created something of her own, something that represented who she was and what she had fought for. And now, the possibilities were endless. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a woman who had turned her dreams into reality, and nothing could stop her now. Naomi walked to the window, looking out at the city below. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the skyline. It was a new day, a new chapter, and she was ready to take it all on. The world had finally seen her for who she truly was, and she was ready to show them even more. Naomi stood in the center of her cafe, the soft hum of conversation around her as customers filled the space. It was everything she had dreamed of, a place where people could gather, share ideas, and connect. The decor was warm and inviting, a reflection of her own journey. The walls were adorned with art from local creators, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee lingered in the air. The cafe was thriving, and it felt like the perfect manifestation of the hard work and dedication she had poured into it. Looking around, Naomi couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just a business. It was her statement to the world. It was proof that she was more than the labels others had tried to place on her. It was proof that she had the power to change her own destiny. As she walked through the cafe, checking in with the staff and greeting regular customers, Naomi noticed the way they looked at her. There was respect in their eyes, something she had never seen before. It was a far cry from the way she had been treated in the past, when she was just another face in the crowd, invisible to those around her. Now, she was the one in control, the one making decisions, and it felt incredible. Naomi's phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, seeing that it was another message from the investor who had reached out to her weeks ago. This time, the tone was different. He wanted to meet, to discuss expanding her business. The offer was enticing, and it was the kind of opportunity she had dreamed of. But Naomi didn't jump at it immediately. She took a moment to think, to remind herself that this was her journey, her path. She wasn't going to rush into anything that didn't align with her values or her vision. After a few moments, she typed out a response, politely asking for more details and expressing her interest in exploring the possibility further. As she sent the message, Naomi couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had gone from being the underdog to a successful entrepreneur. She had built something from the ground up, and now the world was starting to take notice. It wasn't just about the cafe, though. It was about the lessons she had learned along the way, lessons about resilience, strength, and believing in herself when no one else did. Naomi had faced adversity, but she had never let it define her. Instead, she used it as fuel to drive her forward, to prove to herself that she was capable of achieving more than anyone had ever thought possible. As she looked out the window of the cafe, watching the people go about their day, Naomi knew that this was only the beginning. She had bigger plans to expand her reach and make an even bigger impact. She was no longer just the woman who had stood behind the counter, invisible and overlooked. She was Naomi Collins, the woman who had taken control of her life and built something extraordinary from nothing. And now, the world was watching.